Welcome to the fourth session in our Impactability learning series with our hosts Alan Mansky and Vicki Kamak. My name is Ted Kuntz. I am the chair of Plan Institute and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. The mission of Plan Institute is research, education, and dissemination of the social innovations developed by families at Plan. We continually look for opportunities for dialogue, collaboration, and partnership. And so we are pleased to work with the Tamarack Institute as our partner in this series. Tamarack is one of the leading organizations in collective community impact. This 7-part webinar series focuses on the impactability of individuals in the disability movement. Al and Vicki have noticed that people with disabilities and their families have a distinct talent for achieving impact by continuously inventing and creating their way out of adversity. Al and Vicki are recognized worldwide as family leaders. They have a talent for working with families and nurturing new ideas and innovations and bringing these ideas to scale. Today's session is entitled Mobilize Your Economic Power. Al and Vicki have invited as their special guest Liz Mulholland, who is the CEO of Prosper Canada. I anticipate that today's discussion with Liz will assist you all in mobilizing your own economic power as you endeavor to advance your social innovation and ideas. Now I'd like to welcome the hosts of the Impactability series, Al Mansky and Vicki Kamak.
Well, thanks, Ted, and welcome, everyone. Welcome from far and wide. Whoops, excuse me. I thought I had prepared by clearing my throat in advance. Devin, you're going to have to figure out how to mute me when I'm clearing my throat, but not when I'm laughing out loud. I understand that we've got folks joining us again for this webinar from New Zealand and Australia, Europe, and the United States, and of course, all across Canada. So send us a note. Do let us know where you're listening to us from. Father Moses Cody, one of Canada's most effective community organizers, founded the Antigonish movement in Nova Scotia during the Depression of the last century. He did it to deal with the profound poverty and unemployment and food shortages that were happening in the Maritimes. He once wrote, "In a democracy, people don't sit in the social or economic bleachers. They all play the game." It's taken Vicki and I a long time to understand what he meant. Social action, yes. Social change, for sure. But economic? Well, isn't that for businesses and corporations? Surely our motives are too pure to be concerned about money. Wrong. Mobilizing your collective economic power is one of the biggest advantages any individual, family, organization, or movement can take. For example, that insight inspired Plan to conceive and advocate for the Registered Disability Savings Plan, which we'll talk a little bit about later today. The prerequisite, if you will, the stage 1 to mobilizing your economic power is to learn how money works, which is one of the many areas of expertise by today's guest, Liz Mulholland. Liz is CEO of Prosper Canada, the premier organization in Canada devoted to financial empowerment. I also know friends in the social enterprise world, throughout the world, to whom Prosper is a sterling international example of mobilizing one's economic power. So Liz, thanks for being with us today, and thanks for Prosper's trailblazing, pioneering work, and for helping all of us learn how money works. And before we get into our conversation, I wonder if you can describe why you changed your organization's name to Prosper. Isn't that rather bold and provocative? You've kind of gone right to the heart of the matter. I mean, aren't we about scraping by and just having enough? You seem to have done the exact opposite and put a bold vision or statement in front of us and embedded in your organization's name. Was that the reason behind it?
Well, thanks, Al, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to join everybody and to talk about this really important topic. The reason we changed our name to Prosper, two reasons. One was three reasons. One, we had a very complicated name before, Social and Enterprise Development Innovations, and that was a change from our original name, which was Self-Employment Development Initiatives, so we kept the acronym but changed the words. It resulted in a lot of confusion. We found our own staff were saying the wrong name of the organization. Our stakeholders were often confused about what we actually did, and it didn't really have a powerful galvanizing effect emotionally for people. So we really wanted a name that I think embodied our bold aspiration for people living in poverty in Canada, which is that it is possible to enable all of them to prosper. We are optimistic and aspirational in nature, the culture of our organization. We want to communicate that clearly. And also we believe that if we help people who are living in poverty to prosper, all Canadians will actually prosper by extension. It makes our whole society stronger. So we wanted a name that really embodied all of that.
Well, that's definitely a beautiful and bold vision for sure, Liz. I was, you know, not only is your vision bold and your name expansive, but your mission or realm of activities really reflects that. And I was really struck by what you say is really your central area of activity, which is that you help organizations in all sectors to build financial empowerment into their services. So organizations in all sectors to build financial empowerment into their services. And I thought it would be really helpful for our listeners to sort of do a bit of a deep dive around that, and we could do it in two steps. And so the first part, I'd love to hear how you would describe or I guess define financial empowerment. What does it mean to you, and what makes it so important?
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Vicki. So financial empowerment has many meanings for many people, but when we use the term, what we're talking about is a specific set of interventions that have been shown to measurably improve financial health for people who are living on low incomes. And we have what we call our 5 main pillars. The first one is really financial literacy, but that includes not just financial education, but also one-on-one financial counseling available to people. The second pillar is really about helping people boost their incomes quickly, and that's through tax filing and accessing their government benefits. We know many Canadians who are low income aren't getting all the entitlements that are due to them because of barriers. Third one is really making sure that people have access to safe and affordable financial products, and people call this financial inclusion. So people who don't have bank accounts or are afraid to use them because maybe they have a debt and are going to payday lenders and check cashers are paying a lot more for their financial services, and these are riskier products for them. And finally, a very important part of financial health is not just our income, but having savings and assets that give us security in the face of short-term emergencies or unexpected costs, but also allow us to invest in our future and to build security and choices for ourselves in the future and for our children. So helping connect people to savings and asset building opportunities. And finally, consumer protection and education. So making sure people are operating in a fair financial marketplace and that they know their rights and responsibilities and they're protected from predatory players in the market. So that's what we mean by financial empowerment. And within any of those areas, there are multiple interventions that have been used at a large scale, often in the United States, but also in Australia, the UK, and in some places in Canada. that have real evidence behind them that show that these things move the dial measurably in improving people's incomes, their savings levels, their debt levels, and their credit scores, which are really what we're trying to do.
Okay, so around, you've around the 5 pillars, very comprehensive analysis underneath that, and a set of tools. So can you tell us how you work with organizations then to begin to, I mean, I'm sure you're working with organizations who might not have even put financial empowerment at the top of what it is that they're doing. How are you working with organizations to begin to embed some of this thinking and some of these tools into their services?
That's a great question. Thanks, Vicki. So we're really trying to build out a financial empowerment ecosystem that didn't exist when we started this work, except for a few supports like tax clinics or credit counseling in communities. So the first job is to actually develop program and intervention models and tools and resources for implementing those and evaluation frameworks. So the way we're doing that is working with partner organizations on the ground across Canada to actually co-develop those, test them in the field with their program participants, refine them, and then share the tools and resources that result from that. And we do that with support from a variety of funders in the private sector as well as government and foundations in Canada. The second stage, though, is we want to get beyond just these pilot projects and really say those are great for developing kind of the know-how and the toolkits. But at the end of the day, you don't want pilot projects to come to an end and that's the end of all the great work. So we are now reaching out to larger service systems in different sectors and saying, there's really strong evidence that if you build benefit screening or financial counseling or financial education or tax clinics into your broader program, it will improve your outcomes, whether we're talking about employment or welfare outcomes or housing, homelessness reduction, health. So we're working with different service systems. Right now we're working with doctors to integrate benefit screening and assistance right into frontline healthcare delivery. We're working with the City of Toronto to look at how we can embed key interventions in their employment and social service system, which is delivered through 19 employment centers across the city. We're talking to credit unions about how we can help them provide better service to their members with low incomes. We're talking with the Ontario Ministry of Advanced Education about how you can build in better financial education and counseling for students as they apply for student loans and then go through their education, post-secondary education, and as they're getting ready to start paying down their student loans. So really, we'll work with anybody that reaches a lot of people who may be struggling with their money and who are low income and want to improve the outcomes for the folks that they work with. So.
Well, it's really clear that you're working across scale with many of these solutions. It strikes me that over the past several decades, we put a lot of effort and time into specifically addressing poverty, both on the policy and the program level. But it also feels like, at least to me, that things are getting worse. I was quite taken aback last week to realize that 1 million Canadians are using food banks, and that in our province, in British Columbia, we have 99 food banks. And like perhaps some of our listeners, I grew up in a time when we didn't have any. So I'm wondering what do you make of this? And what does it call us to do in response?
It's a really challenging environment, and it's quite complex. We're used to thinking about poverty as only a matter of income, and we look at people's annual incomes. But I think when we do that, we're actually missing some very important dynamics that are putting a lot of pressure on households right now and can result in things like increased trips to the food bank or resorting to payday lenders because you come up short. And one of the dynamics that's really emerged very strongly from American research which I suspect may be true in Canada, but we haven't done the research here yet to determine if this is the case, is that more and more people are engaged now in what we call precarious work. So they don't have a steady full-time job anymore. They're cobbling together incomes from a variety of part-time jobs, many of which are shift work or contract work. They don't know from 1 week or 1 month to the next how much work they're going to have the next month or when they'll be paid for it necessarily. So what you're getting is, even for people who are middle income and whose income at the end of the year rounds up to a nice number, what you get is from month to month a great deal of swing in how much income actually comes through their door. And we all know that our monthly expenses are quite fixed. We have to pay our mortgage or our rent, we have our food bills, we have our car payment, we have our insurance payment. But if these things are fixed and they're the same every month, but your income dips down wildly in some months, then you come up short. And so for some families, this can create a crisis, leading to eviction, but it can also mean that families have to go to a food bank in order to put food on the table until money comes in. So I think that's a really important dynamic that we need to pay much more attention to. So even if we see that, poverty rates as measured by income may not be escalating, this kind of volatility and cash flow problem for households can result in short-term, cash flow problems that really have the same effect as being poor. Even though you have money owed to you, it's not coming in this month. So I think that's something that we really need to pay a lot more attention to in Canada. I think there are broader dynamics, obviously, around poverty levels that are still much higher than we would like them to be. So I don't want to take anything away from that. We still need to focus really hard on bringing those down and also paying attention to income inequality as well. But I think this income volatility dynamic is quite urgent and it's growing as well. So
I appreciate how you've actually phrased this poverty by income. This past week we heard somebody presenting, and he was talking about poverty in Canada, and he used the term material poverty, which I also really appreciated. It just seems to, it recognizes that we can be impoverished certainly in one area of our lives and be just fine in many other areas of our lives. So I just thought I'd flag that, and hearing you using that term again, poverty by income, or when I heard material poverty, I've just vowed myself to start using that descriptor when I talk about poverty from now on, so it doesn't sort of pigeonhole a person or a family solely based on their economic situation.
Yeah, so I think it is important to recognize this is one dimension of people's lives, but I think it's also important to recognize that our financial well-being is a thread that impacts on almost every other aspect of our lives and the lives of our families in two ways, I think. One, in terms of how secure we are, and two, in terms of the range of options that are open to us in terms of realizing our aspirations for our lives or for our children's lives. So, so we don't want to define anybody by their economic circumstances or reduce them to only that. But I think it's also one of the reasons we're doing our work is that this dimension of financial stability and security has kind of been the blind spot in Canada's social infrastructure, in the sense that we've paid a lot of attention to giving people sort of a basic minimum income if they become unemployed or they need to go on welfare or disability support, but we haven't paid attention to their broader financial well-being, which really, if you think about a household, it's a bit like a small business. You need to pay attention not just to your income, but to your assets and your debts and the combination of these things and how they shake out together. So there's really interesting research coming out of the United States. It says a middle-income family with no liquid savings is actually more vulnerable to poverty than a lower-income family that has a little bit of savings because they go into crisis immediately if an unexpected shock happens to them. So I think it's a really interesting dimension that we haven't paid very much attention to, is kind of taking a more holistic view of people's financial health.
Liz, I like how you're shifting our gaze now to not only consider these questions of income and asset assets as they affect individuals and families, but also you've introduced into the conversation organizations as well, and certainly in our work in trying to create a social entrepreneurial mindset for the organization. Just about everything that you've said for individuals and families applies to organizations as well, to the organizations often who are supporting people who are poor, but ironically who may not see them as poor. I know one of the biggest challenges that we faced as we were working with the Registered Disability Savings Plan was to convince people that poverty, as Vicki says, material poverty, was an issue for our friends and family members with disability. And so we learned the importance of mindset, or how it can enable, but also how it can hold you back. And I wondered, if you could talk about that a little bit. Does that hold true more generally, or not? Are there some fixed mindsets about people who experience poverty, either poverty of income or poverty of assets or both, that we also have to address, as well as focus on some programmatic elements? Do you have any thoughts on that, that kind of welfare mentality, I suppose I'm getting at?
Sure. I think there are two important assumptions that we often run up against in our work that really do shape how policymakers and service providers think about solutions to poverty. I think the first one is, the old canard about the culture of poverty. When people are poor, they have this culture that makes them short-sighted. They don't think about their future. They make ill-informed decisions or irresponsible decisions. I'm kind of painting this very bleakly, but I think there's really important research that's emerged from the kind of behavioral sciences that shows that all people, when they're confronted by scarcity of something that's very central to their well-being, whether that's money, time, food, it has an impact cognitively on how we make decisions, and it has two effects. It makes us focus on the short term because we need to optimize what we need desperately but don't have enough of. And it causes tunnel vision so that we're not paying attention to other things because we're so focused on trying to make sure that we're getting what we need. And also it makes it very hard to think about other things because if you take the example of scarcity of money, poverty, people have to make trade-off decisions all day long about, can I afford to do this? If I do this, what else am I not going to do in order to be able to eat, pay my bills, pay my rent on time, keep the hydro on? While you and I can just hop in a cab when we feel like it, or maybe we see a book that we want to buy, we just buy it. We don't have to think, oh, what am I going to not do because I'm buying that book or hopping in this cab? And that's true for anybody. This is true of every single human being on the planet. Our brains all work the same way. So this isn't a culture of poverty. It's just basic cognitive behavior of human beings universally. So I think that assumption needs to be put to bed, that there is a culture that comes with poverty. It's not. It's just a cognitive effect. The second attitude comes around saving. And there's a general belief that people with low incomes can't save, that they and that it's immoral to ask them to save because they're already under financial stress, and people don't see the value of them saving. The reality is many low-income people do save. Sometimes they have to save on the sly because there are restrictions on them accumulating savings, but they understand that you need a small cushion in case of unexpected eventualities. Your car breaks down, your child needs to go to the dentist, whatever it may be. And also, in order to get ahead, we need to have some savings. So if you get a job opportunity, but you have to buy a helmet and some work boots, you need to have a little bit of money put aside to do that. So, so I think, and there are also very important evidence on the impact that savings has in improving people's kind of lowering their financial stress level and also improving their ability to take advantage of opportunities. So, and the third assumption, the mindset that comes out is actually in community services. Many, I think, community service providers who work with low-income people have had, I don't want to say a blind spot, because I think some of them are very aware that people's underlying financial instability is a big barrier to their success in different programs that they're participating in. But there's been a reluctance to engage on it, or a feeling that they're not equipped or properly resourced or mandated by their missions to tackle this dimension of their participants' lives. So they haven't felt confident about going there. The good news is that when we engage with organizations, often they're very relieved that somebody's offering them tools and resources to finally address this dimension. But they need to have proper training and support, and they need the funding to be able to do this work properly. So, so I think that one's in some ways the easiest one to change, and we're really delighted by the response of the many community partners that are really getting interested in this work across the country.
So Liz, I want to pick up on this, particularly this question of the culture of poverty and the belief that people can't save. And I'm going to just step back a little bit and say that our listeners are probably not aware that you have another area of expertise, which is in making public policy. You're a member of Sean Moore's Advocacy School, and we'll have another faculty from there on a future webinar, Donna Thompson. But you also used to work for a while in the Prime Minister's office and have helped governments provincially as well with policy making. I'm particularly grateful for a very critical role that you played when it was very, very lonely lobbying for the Registered Disability Savings Plan, and with one phone call you got us in front of a key person in the Prime Minister's office. We've had a question come in from our listeners, which is how do you shift the cultural discussion around poverty and around savings? And I think that has begun to happen for people with disability with the Registered Disability Savings Plan, and not only your specific individual tactical help to us, but Prosper played a role in shaping the nature of the Registered Disability Savings Plan as a genuine savings vehicle. I wonder, and I know you continue to work with Plan closely on its implementation and spread. I wouldn't mind some reflections from you about the Registered Disability Savings Plan and its impact, and not only on culture as we've been talking about it, but also more generally on shifting the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I think the RDSP is a really seminal piece of our social infrastructure for families, for people with disabilities and their families. And it's a great example of a sort of universal asset building kind of instrument. But like everything else from a distance, it looks beautiful, but when you get up close, it certainly has a few wrinkles and warts. It's a difficult vehicle for people to access, and there are many reasons for why it was designed that way, but, and this isn't true just of the RDSP, I think you'd say the same for registered education savings plans as well. So I think while it's an excellent vehicle, its potential hasn't been fully realized yet in Canada. The good news is, though, that for those who are able to access it, there are very generous government grants and incentives that can really help a family and a person with a disability to build their financial security. So it's also, I think, its existence has challenged some of the thinking about people with disabilities and kind of this comfort with, well, they're just going to be poor their whole life. And I think policymakers now understand, no, now we have this opportunity if we can get more take-up. It really does cause us to rethink our whole concept of what is the aspiration for financial security for somebody with a disability. And you see the example of the BC government now saying our disability support payments, there should be the bare minimum. These are the floor for people, not the ceiling. And we should be trying a whole bunch of ways to encourage people to build their financial security. So, and one of those is we're not going to restrict your ability to save and build up assets through the RDSP or other measures as well in the way that we did before. We're really going to encourage you to take every opportunity to save and invest in your future. And that's not everybody is going to benefit from that. There are many people that are struggling to get by. So I think we still need to do more on the income support side and providing effective employment supports for people with disabilities. But for those who are able to generate income or who have friends and family members that want to invest in their future security, I think the RDSP is a great start. But I think we always have to take a holistic view of both the barriers that people with disabilities face to achieving financial security in the short and the long term, and also a holistic view to having a range of options open to them to find the right path forward for themselves and their family, because there's not one route forward for any group of people. We need to give people choice and a range of opportunities that they could take advantage of. So I think the RDSP is a fantastic start, but we should continue to look at other ways and to learn more about the financial lives of people with disabilities and the barriers and opportunities that we should be addressing to really try and build out you know, a much stronger platform for them to build their financial security on.
All right. I really appreciate the thoughtful reflections and the emphasis. You've helped stretch my understanding around the importance of savings. Of course, that's part of the RDSP name, but still, you've really put it into a context of the mix of income, assets, and debts. So that savings become really a part of economic empowerment for anyone. I wonder if we can switch from the individual now to thinking about organizations, and in particular the ideas of social enterprise. I mean, we see a whole trend across the nonprofit and charitable sector now with organizations expected to be generating their own revenue, and certainly in our own experience at Plan, we've always maintained a certain independence from government. In our case, though, we were very focused on that independence, in particular to leverage or mobilize our assets, if you will, to earn income in order to conduct our policy work. And I'm wondering if you have, so we were thinking we wanted that independence in order to have a clear voice, to not have our funding threatened, and so on. And I'm wondering, if you have other examples of this version of what we would call mobilizing your economic power. Have you seen other organizations or initiatives where they really are using social enterprise for policy work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I could say yes. I don't, but I think that may not be because there aren't any examples, but I may just not be familiar with them. But I think a social enterprise is a very important opportunity for many organizations, not every organization necessarily. So I don't think it should ever be an expectation. And I think organizations have to really trying to find the right revenue model for them that best supports their impact and their mission. But we look at social enterprise in our organization as one of the ways to generate unrestricted revenue. So this is revenue where we're not tied in what we have to spend it on. And Vicki, I think you pointed to one of the areas that we would love to spend it on, which is research and policy work and advocacy. So because those are hard things to secure funding from through other means, such as government grants or foundations. And also it helps you deal with costs that other grantors don't cover, because we know that often nonprofits get stuck in a starvation cycle where it seems like the more grants they get, the more they have these unfunded costs that get larger and larger, because often grants won't pay sufficient overhead amount for their, their finance, their admin, their management team, etc. And they tend to be quite rigid. And some funders will only pay 5% overhead or 10%, which is, I don't know any organization that can run on that. So the more grants you get, the more you have unfunded costs. So I think enterprise activity can be an important way to help generate some revenue to smooth out those unfunded liabilities. I think it's not a slam dunk that every organization can go down this road. I think it's pretty straightforward for charities from a regulatory perspective. They can undertake enterprise activities if it's a related business related to their charitable purpose, or if they just use 90% of volunteers to deliver the enterprise activities. Nonprofits have a more complicated regulatory framework to deal with, and I think it's a lot murkier about how much scope and room to roam they have on this front. I think also when you actually start to operationalize trying to generate some enterprise revenue too, it's not always simple to transform a nonprofit culture into a business culture, or to find a way to build a hybrid. So you definitely need staff who have strong business skills and understand and experience doing business analysis and figuring out business plans for different activities. And you also have to balance your mission and your revenue goals and make sure sometimes they can be in tension with one another, but I don't think you ever want to end up with your revenue, enterprise revenue goals kind of dominating over your mission goals. You really have to find a way to make your enterprise activities help drive your mission forward, not compete with it. And everybody has an issue with startup capital for their enterprise activities, just like pure businesses do. So in our case, what we've tried to do is use traditional grants and philanthropy to help develop the products and services that we think over time we may be able to turn into enterprise activities, or at least full cost recovery, even if they're not generating a profit. But we're going step by step down this road quite carefully. And it is an area that we think we'll be building out more in our organization. It's part of our overall sustainability plan. But I don't see it as a very simple thing to do. It can be quite challenging. So, but I think the benefits in terms of sustainability are worth it if it's compatible with your mission.
So Liz, this question of culture in an organization, we found to be very important, and we noticed that a lot of people who, they've heard the concept of social enterprise now, of course, it's been around for an awfully long time, and they finally come to the conclusion that they're going to try and become more entrepreneurial, but they treat it as a fundraising program. And we, in our own experience, we discovered that unless everybody in the organization is buying into the notion that being socially entrepreneurial actually is not only about money, it's about furthering our mission. It's those twin goals, and that's why it's called social enterprise as opposed to just enterprise. And it's not just about money. I mean, I think you talked about this earlier in terms of individuals and families, that we can do an awful lot to empower people financially by taking advantage of the resource flows that already exist in the assets that we already have at our disposal. And I think this group. It's a remarkable model, I think. The group is called Sports Matters Group, and they're a very effective public policy organization in Canada, and to some extent I think they should be legendary, some of the achievements that they've made in advancing public policy for everyone, not just professional, public policy around sports, not just for professional athletes, but for everyone. And they did that by essentially saying, we're going to leverage all of our resources in our network. We're running close to the end of our time, but I wonder if you have a quick comment about that work and whether that's compatible with this kind of leveraging mentality and methodology that you've been talking about.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is, and I think you know, Canadians are known worldwide for our collaborative abilities, but I sometimes think that people are so caught up in the the pressures of meeting their day-to-day business that we sometimes lose sight in our sector of the opportunities to bring folks who are part of our community of purpose, for lack of a better term, who share our goal together and trying to undertake some common efforts together and leverage contributions from everybody, and not in a rigid, highly structured way, but in a really nimble way. And I think Sport Matters was a perfect example of doing that, where they would just simply kind of put things out to their network and say, we think maybe we want to work on this, whoever's interested, join in, and create opportunities for dialogue. And then as kind of action items would emerge, they'd talk about, well, how can we move that forward? Who would like to make a contribution? And their motto was, the best contribution is the one you actually want to make. So nobody was pressured, and if nobody wanted to make a contribution, they just decide that clearly wasn't a priority for people, and they put it aside for later. And we've tried to, I think, employ a similar approach through our ABLE Financial Empowerment Network, where we often, you know, do joint submissions, policy work, and stuff like that, with everybody chipping in a little, pretty fast, and we turn things around pretty quickly, and everybody's pretty nimble and appreciates that everybody's kind of trying to do things off the corner of their desk, so we're all patient and tolerant with each other. But we get quite a lot done that way. So I think there are opportunities if people can be nimble and flexible to make more things happen with small contributions from lots of players in very informal ways.
Excellent. You know, when we read across our discussion this morning, and certainly in your work, it seems to me that what we're trying to do is to close the gap between, you know, what might be the short-term kinds of infusions of cash and and that relies on welfare and long-term sustainable income is where we want to get to. And it's led a number of disability leaders, including ourselves, to seriously examine the idea of basic income. And it seems, you know, there's a bit of a wave going around the world. I mean, we'd had an experiment in this country years back in Dauphin, Manitoba, but now, today, it's become a very popular concept in Ontario. And the government there actually has asked one of the few world expert based in Canada, Senator Hugh Segal, to design a basic income experiment that we think is the boldest in North America. He's recommended that the basic income for people with disabilities be $1,850 a month with no clawbacks for earned or unearned income and no reporting. I mean, for us, when we think about that, it's like kicking the disability benefits right out of the welfare system. Just wondering what your thoughts are on basic income. How do you see it? Is there momentum under it? Do you see its potential in the same way that we are? Have you identified some limitations of this approach?
Well, I'll be the first person to say I'm not a technical expert on basic income models, but I definitely do think that the time has come to take a really good look at it for a variety of reasons. One, the labor market has changed dramatically, and more and more people will never have a steady job, a full-time job with good benefits. They're going to be cobbling together incomes from all sorts of sources, changing jobs all the time. So ensuring people we have a social safety net that actually is responsive to that and doesn't take too long to kick in and leave people high and dry in these transition periods, or if they are working but are not earning very much, are not giving them enough they don't have enough money to even achieve a modicum of dignity and meet the bare necessities of life, then we're really not, I think, living up to our potential and our moral obligations as a society. So I think basic income is a way to create a system that's more flexible and responsive to the changes in the labor market and the pressures that people are under now. I think it's a way to lift the floor so that everybody in this country can live with dignity and meet their basic needs, which is very important. I think in a country as wealthy as Canada, not to do that is wrong. I also think it redirects resources away from kind of that whole infrastructure around policing people, making sure they're adhering to a whole variety of rules, many of which are really about just trying to prevent so-called cheating, but are often impeding people from actually achieving greater self-sufficiency or well-being. I think it's a sign of real progress that we're contemplating moving resources out of that whole policing infrastructure and putting them directly into giving people a decent quality of life and more opportunity. And I think in our travels around engaging with different levels of government, we're certainly starting to hear more of that talk. How do we take the people who work in these systems now and turn them from people who are enforcing rules into people who are actually providing coaching and supports and connecting people to opportunities and other supports that can help them build their self-sufficiency or just have their needs met. So I think it's it's a profound change. I think the time has come, and I'm hoping that we do move forward with some really ambitious pilots. And it seems like people really are embracing it for the real opportunity that it is. They're not just, governments aren't just looking at it as a cost-cutting measure, which is really encouraging. So
thanks, Liz.
I'll have to stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned, and we'll for our listeners, we'll have links to Sports Matters Group and to this recent recommendation for basic income for Ontarians with disabilities, and I know these experiments are being developed in other parts of the world as well. I want to pull the chair of the Plan Institute in, and our host for this series, or moderator. I want to pull him in for some questions on his part. Ted, join the conversation, and is there a reflection that you have after watching Plan, struggle with the challenges of social enterprise within a charitable container over so many years?
Thanks, Al. That was the piece that I was really attentive to in this conversation and really appreciated it. And I was particularly, Liz, when you talked about needing to transform the nonprofit culture into a business culture, I know that for me personally, that has been my challenge. I've sat on the boards of many charitable organizations, and that charitable mindset, it's almost like the poverty mindset. I think, Al, in your opening comments, you kind of referenced that, money is a bad thing, and the problem is that we don't utilize a resource that gives us the power to do the work that we're committed to doing. I think one of the most important moments in my own evolution of this, Al and Vicki, was when, do you remember when John Ralston Saul hosted a gathering of charitable organizations across Canada a few years ago? And I remember the title of his presentation was, "You Can't Get There From Here." And he was talking about the need to shift from that mindset of having the hand out in a begging, kind of give me a hand, mindset to the one of extending your hand in partnership and recognizing that every organization has something valuable to offer, and figuring out what your asset is or what contribution you have, and then figuring out a relationship of reciprocity that is more sustainable and powerful than that charitable mindset. So I remember that was a very important part of my shift at Plan. I'm also thinking about an example of that when I sat on the board of our local hospice organization. And when I first joined that group, they were in a poverty mindset. I remember having a conversation about whether we could afford to mail out the board packages or whether we had to hand deliver them because we didn't have enough money for stamps. And one of the things that we did in trying to figure out what are the assets that we have at hospice is we recognized that we developed very rich relationships with families as they came through the hospice experience. And you know, in a very pragmatic way, when someone passes, there are assets, family assets, clothing, etc., that need to be disposed of. And so we use those assets to open up a thrift store. And the relationships that we formed with families, they were our best volunteers, and they would bring the family assets that now needed to be disposed of. And I watched this hospice organization go from poverty to being actually quite wealthy and able to look at larger goals because of that ability to move into a more social entrepreneurial mindset.
So Liz, we're now very, very close to the end of this marvelous chat with you. Do you have just a quick comment on Ted's reflections, and then we'll throw it back to Ted?
Sure. I think that's a great example, Ted. It's a beautiful story of how you can go from rags to riches. I don't like to be too critical of our partners in the community sector because it is extremely challenging to do the work they do, but I think it is important to build a bolder aspiration, and one of the things that sometimes helps is to be very explicit about what kind of organizational culture you want to have, and we've done that work in our organization about having everybody participate and saying this is the kind of organization, this is the culture we want to have in here, and how are we going to create it and maintain it, and maybe that could be helpful to other organizations. I think also just if I can share kind of some of the things that we've learned as we grapple with, you know, how do you get resources to do important work. Our observations are that funders do respond to an aspirational mindset, and a big aspiration with a bit of boldness in it does help set you apart. You need a clear and credible plan to get there, and some proof of possibility, as my friend Rick Young likes to say. So evidence that shows that these things can be done is always really valuable. I think it's important to be able to talk to funders about how you're going to measure your impact and about how you're going to build some measure of sustainability and scale in your effort. And whether that's scale across your own community or neighborhood, or whether that's scale at a national level. And also to demonstrate your ability to work in partnership and to leverage resources from all sorts of other players so that no funder feels like they're being asked to bear the whole burden, but they're joining a broader coalition of players that are helping to make things happen. And those resources can be time, they can be expertise, they don't have to be money always, but I think that is kind of the magic formula that's worked for us. And so I think if people are trying to figure out how to raise resources, and of course what you just said, Ted, which is take stock of your assets and say what is the thing that we uniquely bring to the table that nobody else can bring, and here's how it can help you in this shared objective that we have. So.
You know, Liz, I would just add to that list, which is an impressive and very thoughtful list, something that I think you've really demonstrated for us today, and that the other piece that an organization needs to have is a clear connection and relationship with the people who are being impacted by the work that's being done. And I really felt that your discussion around, you know, the cognitive impacts of poverty, you know, some of those examples brought us all just a little bit closer to the reality that people experience on an everyday basis. So that really brought some heart into the discussion today, to this often technical discussion around money. So very appreciative of the time you've given us. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
And I'll just turn it over to Ted to wrap things up here.
Yes, unfortunately, it's time to close. Al, Vicki, Liz, a rich conversation. Thank you so much again. And Liz, I really like the title, The Boldness of the Title Prosper. I think that it's inspiring to hear that. So I'd just like to thank all of those that joined us today. Your being with us on this, and your own dynamic and thought-provoking conversations that I know will follow is important. I want to thank our partners who have supported the Plan Institute and Tamarack. in hosting this webinar series. Their efforts make it possible for us to do what we do. To all those listening, please remember to look for an email later this week that will have links to the audio and other material that's related to today's webinar. There will also be that discount code for the purchase of Al's book. We welcome your feedback as always, and so email us. Let us know how we are doing. Looking forward to having you join us at our next webinar, which is Tuesday, January the 10th, 2017, the same times, 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern. And the idea for discussion will be who you are is as important as how. And I'll be the one who gets to sit in with Al and Vicki that week and participate in a rich discussion, which I'm much looking forward to. Finally, a reminder that all of you need to register for each webinar individually, so if you haven't done so, please go online and register for the next webinar. And we have lots more exciting events and resources available, so please visit our website at planinstitute.ca or rdsp.com and sign up for our monthly e-zine. So thank you everyone for joining us. We're grateful and have a great day.